Hi everyone, my name is Rusveer This is not my YouTube channel, but Thig and I have been talking a lot about current events, and I thought that it would be really important for him to get on here and address a lot of questions and comments that have been coming up in the news and on social media and from our friends and family. So we wanted to make this video to just basically share some of the discussions we've been having as a family at home, and just our insights and some of our conversations here at home. And so I will let you get into
I guess I want to say we've both been directly impacted by so much of this over the years that even as we're consuming a lot of this media, a lot of it's hitting just really close to home, and it's reminding us of our own hurtful memories and things like that, and sort of, well, what do we have to look forward to, or for our daughter, whatever it is. And it's a lot to unpack, and at least for me, this is a huge reason behind why I wanted to sit and talk about it, was to help sort out what am I feeling and what am I thinking. And I'm sure a lot of other people too have a ton of questions, but it's hard to come forward and ask. And it's like, I also kind of want to recognize that it's like on social media, there's not a lot of discussion happening. It feels a lot of times like people just talking at each other, or screaming over each other, and a discussion is really what is needed. So hopefully this sort of invites people to ask questions or give feedback or whatever, but mostly this is just for us, to get this out of our head. Yeah.
So I think that Thig would be a better person to address white privilege. What is it? What is it not? Is it a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to talk about because it's kind of a hot button term, that people use. I mean, you say it and you're thinking, what does that even mean? I don't have special access to things in society, or I'm not that much more wealthy or that much better off, or like my life hasn't been, I'm not immune to hardship, because of my skin color. And I think that if that's kind of your knee-jerk reaction, that's really missing the point in terms of what is this idea of white privilege. That's kind of, it should be upsetting, to you to hear that. But, it's not a backstage pass. It's not that you get all these special privileges and everything that everybody else doesn't get, right? It's that there is so much bias and negative stereotypes and discrimination that's happening to people of color, and you bypass tons and tons and tons of that, right? And so it's like, it's a very wide-reaching, sort of position to be in, right? So it's like, it's your portrayal in the news, like being viewed more favorably, or just like when you think of like standards of beauty, for instance, at least here in North America, it's like, whiteness is supreme, the straight hair, whatever it is, the facial features, etc. It's social mobility, where it's, you have a lot more opportunity than a lot of people of color, especially if they're much poorer, have. And that's because it's just because of the history, right?
Well, like, look how schools are funded.
Right.
We're talking about like your experience growing up in the States too, right? So
Right.
public schools are funded by property taxes.
Yes.
And so if you live in government tract housing and projects, there's no money going into the schooling.
Yeah. And if you live in an area that's incredibly poor, then also then there's a ton of crime that goes along with that, because people need to live, right? And there's a lot of frustration and anger in those communities too. It comes pouring out of the seams, and so there's a lot of adversity there that you'd bypass because of, you're just lucky enough to be born in the right neighborhood or whatever it is.
There's a lot of people that say that they, like you said, that they are white and they still experienced hardships. As a birth doula and a childbirth educator, and all of the births that I've been to, I can tell you that the ones where there was a woman of color, and it's a statistic that women of color, they have a disproportionately greater risk for everything from being, ignored by care providers, of birth trauma, of not being informed of their options during childbirth. And even when there's been a partner or a support person with them during childbirth, when that support person was a white doctor or a black doctor, was when, the nurses and everything are offering him a chair to sit in, and can we get you anything, and it's been a long day for you. And, the one where there was a black doctor, it was like he wasn't a doctor, he was just another guy in the room, and it was same hospital, same OB, same nurses. It's hard to not see it, but when you don't want to see it, it's just...
Yeah, I think in healthcare too, there's a lot of that, like minority voices are not taken seriously, with health complaints, heart attack and things like that. Like, if you're a white, you're treated differently. Your symptoms are taken more seriously. It's escalated more quickly.
Oh, it's not automatically assumed that it's a drug overdose or
it's a lifestyle thing, or you're just at higher risk, right? Yeah. And then what else? Representation. I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
Right. I think this is something that all people of color around the world sort of notice. I think as young kids, even, of like how you're not just how you're portrayed in the media, but it's that it's hard to find another person of color like you in the media, period. Right. Whether that's politically, whether that's celebrities, or just like people on television or in cartoons, or anything like that. And all this stuff together really affects your worldview, and it affects your self-image, and so it's like, if it's not been your experience of, you're going out and you feel like you're getting harassed by the police all the time, or your teachers are constantly talking down to you, or every time you walk into a room, it's, people are making fun of you for your skin color, calling you derogatory, racial slurs, or like just looking at you like you're some kind of dog without a collar.
Right.
Like I kind of joke about it now. Like I have this joke where I say, like, when we've moved anywhere in the States, right, and we're living in a townhouse or, like middle class sort of area, and I'm walking down the street and you see people locking their doors and squeezing on tight to their purses, or crossing the street when they see me come in, or whatever it is. I'm like, if I am the scariest thing you've seen in this neighborhood, I know this is a good place, right? It's like, but at the same time, like, how reasonable is that? Like you look at a person and then you see their skin color, and then you're thinking this is a threat, right? Or this is someone who doesn't belong here because there's no black people here, for instance, right?
So when was the last time that people really had to examine white privilege and understand it? I mean, we have the Rodney King riots and things like that happened before a lot of people that are in these protests were even born. So I think, like, I'm just saying, everybody, we have to ask each other a lot more questions.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Sit down and have discussions and have honest conversations about our history and how we got here. And, like, as an African American, which we don't, here in Canada, don't have a great understanding of the civil rights movement and of slavery and everything that happened in the States. And Canada, is very quiet about our own history of slavery here. But can you touch on, like, Jim Crow and the Tuskegee syphilis trials and things like that? Like, just how we got to this mess?
Yeah, well, it's like, I don't know how to answer, like, when did this start, or when's the last time we've really been examining this? I feel like it's been a nagging frustration, at least in the Black community in America, for generations upon generations, right? And I think that a lot of that backstory is totally lost because there's no recaps in the news, right? Who was that comedian that we heard say that? Like, the news is arguably the most important broadcast on television, and there's no recaps whatsoever, right? And so, like, if that hasn't been your experience, or you're not hearing these stories from other people and like elders in your family, you know, about what it was like, you know, facing a lot of discrimination or whatever it is, you're totally blind to the whole backside of that. You know, it's like you don't know about, you know, the Atlantic slave trade and, you know, just 400 years in America, you know, of slavery, and then coming out of that, it was, you know, this, you know, hatred, you know, for people of color, you know, especially these former slaves, and they're treated as a problem or like a social menace, and what do we do with these people, you know, or these animals, and then so that's when you start seeing legislation, I think, being passed to oppress them and keep them from moving forward.
It was exclusionary.
Yeah. And then so it's, okay, you can't own a home, you can't own weapons because you don't own a home, you can't vote, and then when you can vote, okay, you're 3/5 of a person. You know, there's the forced segregation, there's lynching, you know, of course, like Tuskegee syphilis trials, you know, Black men in their community being used as guinea pigs to study syphilis, and they're being injected with it, and then they're not being treated so that the you know, medical professionals can sit and examine the progression of this disease that they want to know more about, right? It's barbaric, right?
So there's a lot of people comparing the Black Lives Matter and the protests and the movement now to the civil rights movement from many years ago, but it's not the same thing at all.
I don't think it's the same. There's a lot of parallels, I think. And I think especially in terms of how quickly a lot of the outrage and everything formulated. And it's sort of this worldwide movement now of everybody's invested, and everybody's saying, yeah, it's happening here too. Like, it's not just America, right? It's Australia, it's Berlin, the UK, it's Europe, it's Canada, it's all over the place. And I feel like there is kind of a similarity there when you think about, you know, the lynching of Emmett Till, which really kicked off the American Civil Rights Movement. Yeah, Emmett Till was like a young African American boy who was visiting the South, and he sees this white woman leaving a store, and a cat calls at her a little bit under his breath, and then she lies and says that she was sexually assaulted by Emmett Till, and Emmett Till was lynched by a bunch of you know, men in the town. And he was just beaten so badly and, you know, chained to a truck and dragged through town. And you couldn't recognize his body afterwards. It was so bad, you know. And Emmett Till's mother had an open casket funeral for him. You know, and when that was, you know, in the papers and, you know, that news was being shared, it really woke people up to something that they were turning a blind eye to for so many years because they didn't realize how bad it was because white privilege.
Okay, and also the woman that said that, what he did.
She lied. She came out later and lied. Yeah. And so it's like that really kicked things off, and I feel like just the use of media to help support the minority position and gain a ton of traction from people who are interested in this kind of thing. There's a similarity there too.
Yeah, seeing George Floyd's face on the news, especially that one shot that everybody's seen with Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck and George Floyd looking directly at the camera. And then, of course, everybody knows he was saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. There's a lot of people that are standing with law enforcement in this. I've worked in law enforcement for a few years in California, in Southern California. And it was rough. I would never go back to it. But, like, as a combat veteran, having been in Iraq and Afghanistan, tell me about your policing work in Iraq. You know, with where you are in your position of standing with law enforcement and, you know, the training aspect of this and, you know, the position a lot of people are having, that there's just like a few bad apples, or this is systemic corruption, or it's just that they need more training.
Or it's not a race issue.
It's not a race issue, it's just a
Yeah.
unit issue, or, yeah.
Yeah. I think the situation is so incredibly complicated, and there's no one thing to blame, right? And it's important, like, I totally sympathize with police departments, across the country, because it's incredibly hard work, and a lot of people don't understand that. There's a huge disconnect between the training that you get, as a police officer, and, understanding the law and the protocols and everything, and sort of what the public perception of what you should be doing is, or what they think your job is. There's a huge disconnect there, right? And like that's a big problem. And so it's like, when I was in Iraq, this was like, I was a young kid. It's my first deployment. We had tons and tons of training going into that, and I get it. I know what it was like, because this was our job, right? I spent a little bit of time sort of at the beginning of my deployment kind of doing counterterrorism type stuff, where it's looking for caches and laying in ambushes and movement to contact, which is like you leave the base and then you're looking for enemy fighters and you're going out there to start a gunfight, basically. And so like I did a little bit of that in the beginning, and then like mostly through the rest of my deployment, like this is all we were, was just a police force for a cluster of 3 cities. And so we were just massively outnumbered.
Right.
Yeah, it was just absolutely ridiculous. And, we're working 18 hours a day. You get a day off every 2 weeks, basically, because it's one soldier per day in the platoon, gets a day off at a time. And, we were just run ragged that whole year. And it was, searching for weapons. It's interviewing people in the community. How can we serve you? What can we do for you? What are your complaints? It's, running traffic stops. It's arresting high-value targets and, doing investigations on where can we find these people, et cetera, et cetera. But, like, for the most part, like, we're just trying to get to know people and say, how can we help you, right? And, like, having had that experience, like, I feel like I totally sympathize with a lot of police officers right now who are caught in the middle, because, like, it's true, they're not all bad. I don't think anybody is saying all cops are bad either. I think that's kind of a propaganda kind of slogan, where people are saying, like, don't demonize the police, or, like, making an issue out of something that's not really an issue. Right, but it's like, yeah, I know what it's like, where you go into a place and you're really trying to do your best and people think that you're out to get them. Right? I know what it's like where, civilians don't understand SOPs. They don't know why you do the things that you do. They don't know why it's important to, what the process is and why that's important. And I understand that. I know what it's like to go into a community and you wish it could be so much better. Right. And you see people who are under extreme threat of violence, people who have been tortured, people who are being threatened constantly.
And they don't trust you.
Yeah, and you, like, not just that, but like you wish there was more you could do, but you have a very specific job, and you hope that it helps in the long run, but like in the end you feel like your hands are tied. Right? And then so it's like, it's not that straightforward, right? It's not that straightforward. And I know that like this issue in the civilian world of police departments are poorly trained, right? Which I agree. I think that it takes a lot of training, for your firearms, for communications, for public relations, for proper submission holds in a way where it's like that, those officers are in complete control of a person, right? It takes a lot of training, and it's like it's ongoing all the time, right? In the military, we don't so much have that problem with a lack of training. In the military, it's a lack of continuity, right, on deployment. So if like you're there for a year, or like when I was in Iraq, I was there for 15 months, and that's what however you behave, that's what the locals can expect from you for that time. And then once you handshake with the next unit and you tag out, it's a totally different ballgame, right? And then so like that's not really fair, but like I can understand, like that's kind of like the equivalent, I think, of like the lack of training, where people are really, really frustrated with police departments and how the public is being treated.
you got a question in your DMs about this.
Yeah, someone gave me a question in a direct message saying, how did my experience in Iraq inform my opinion of systematic oppression, right? And like, you know, with all the things that I just said about like what my experience was and how I sympathize with the police, like there is a but to that, right? And so it's like, one thing is like, I think it's also important to point out is like, when I was in Iraq, we made mistakes, right? We made mistakes, and yeah, there's always civilian casualties in war, or property damage that is unintended, or whatever it was, or people coming to us seeking reparations because it's like, because you're here, this happened,
Right.
right? And every single time that happened, we bent over backwards to make amends, to say, I'm sorry, and what more can I do, right? To try to fix this as best we can. Right, and then unfortunately, especially when it comes to loss of life, like you can't replace people ever, right? And so like it was a lot of really tough calls to make, and like we always, at least my unit anyway, tried to be as forthcoming and honest as possible and fair, you know. And like it's a good point that I also want to make about like in combat, there's this idea of physical terrain and human terrain. Right, so like in war, like you're always trying to get the high ground, or like the most easily defensible position, right? And you want the best weapon possible, whether that's air superiority, or you want to be on top of a hill looking down on the enemy, or you want to control where they can move in and out of the battle zone so you can increase your combat effectiveness, right? And that's physical terrain, but there's also this other aspect of it that's called human terrain. And human terrain is like capturing human terrain has now kind of become the central focus, at least of the Army when I was on my deployments. And they do something called COIN. COIN is called counterinsurgency. And the slogan of COIN is winning the hearts and minds.
Yep.
Right? So you go over there, you win hearts and minds, and any civilian casualty is considered a loss. Collateral damage of any kind is considered a loss. You're always trying to get people to be self-sufficient, and you're trying to build infrastructure and provide opportunity for people. And they're trying to move away from this idea of victory through attrition, right? Or the kill ratio as a sense of victory. It's like how many of us died versus how many of them died, right? Which is kind of the standard since Vietnam. They're really trying to move away from that. And it's like, this is why it was so important to make amends, because if you lose that human terrain, like if you go into a place and the populace is just getting, you know, terrorized by people who are bombing the city, or innocent civilians are getting killed, just caught in the crossfire, whatever it is, or you're, you know, people are getting harassed and they feel it's unnecessary or excessive or whatever. They can push you out of areas. You know, you lose tactical advantage. People aren't coming to you for help. They're not feeding you any kind of information of saying like, okay, this is what's going on after you leave, and you know, other forces are, you know, bullying us or whatever it is. And so, anyways, in spite of all of that going on, like I realize that force is not the path to social order.
No.
Like we can't go there, kill whoever we want, think we have carte blanche to do whatever we want and have zero repercussions. Like that's, you know, a fantasy, you know. But like I also want to point out this, like there was, like in getting to the answering the question, there was this, like you sort of see this veil of kind of like white supremacy, you know. It's like sort of this, it's there, but it's very subtle.
Yeah.
Right? So it's dehumanizing, you know, the local populace over there. It's creating this rhetoric of us versus them. It's treating people like they're commodities, like you just gotta like keep them happy and stay out of their way and try not to disrupt them too much, and, you know, win them over onto your side or whatever it is. You know, even if you see like leadership making really bad calls, just the nature of the chain of command and organizational structure, it kind of prevents people who would really want to speak out from either making an impact or from speaking out at all. Right? There's a ton of apathy, right, about like just seeing suffering going on over there, and what life must be like for other people, right? And it's like you're not even looking at people as like they're caught in the crossfire, or if they could make a better choice or have a better life, they would. You're really trained to sort of look at people like they're all accessories to whatever's going on, and that they deserve the suffering, like they earned it, right? Or it's their fault that this oppressive regime sort of exists in their area, right? And the people that we did get along really well with were the people who were assimilating. Right, like that's the people who like won the most favor with us. People who spoke English, people who had like Christian names or names that were like super dumbed down so that they're easier. It was easier for us to pronounce them. People that liked Western
American,
movies
yeah.
or music or whatever it was, and people who were just not rigidly following Islam. Right, people
Right.
who were just totally clean shaven and they don't really pray, and like at least not around us, and they're not really strict with with the tenets or anything, where it's kind of like Christianized in a sense of like pray on your own time, go to church once a week kind of thing, and
Right.
like keep your practice private, and so it's like it gave me kind of like a behind the scenes look of like what it must be like back home,
Yeah.
where it's like it's easy, like you come into the system and you're like, I didn't ask for this is just the way that it is, right? And then you become sort of complicit, in that system. And I was like, this must be what it's like back home, sort of like with a lot of people who are benefiting off the suffering of other people, or they don't really see people as human beings, or they're okay just seeing a lot of injustice and they don't say anything about it or whatever it is. And like, I guess it was a very informative, like developmental experience for me being in Iraq.
You got another question in your DMs. How were you affected by white supremacy in the Sikh community?
I think you can talk a little bit about this in terms of what our experience was.
Oh man.
Just of like
the number of times that I've been pulled aside privately in front of Dig, people asking me why I couldn't find a Punjabi munda, why I couldn't marry a Punjabi. It's never really going to be accepted by family, even though we were married 10 years and we have a 4-year-old. And
that's a euphemism, by the way. That's a huge euphemism, like trying to be gentle about that. But,
yeah. But I mean, quite honestly, it's angering to see a lot of, the acknowledgement that the Sikh community has a lot of work to do with our own prejudice and racism within our community, and going to these Black Lives Matter movements, the protests, and with the signage saying Sikhs for Black Lives, that has certainly not been our experience from the first time we went to the Gurdwara to sometimes even now, yesterday at the store even. It's constant. And even though we've found our Sangat in our community that accepts our relationship, our daughter, him, me, that took a decade, and so many people would just be put off from Jump Street, like just one encounter and say they're all like this. And that was, going to the Gurdwara, having that experience. We were married the first time we went to the Gurdwara together, and was still called out, in the Divan hall of why I married him. It took us maybe 6-7 months before we went back to the Gurdwara again. So many people I know would just not. And, finding that support from our Sangat and our group of friends that we now have to support us in our Sikhi and in our family life and everything was a real challenge, you know. And
I think for me, like you come into that environment not really anticipating up front that there's going to be this much pushback because of colorism. Right, and then it's like I'm trying to do the best that I can with trying to move forward, or like trying to learn more, educate myself, and it's like it's either you're being stonewalled, or it's a lot of people saying you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, but they're not giving you a route in to make that happen. Or it's like people giving me a hard time about like, you don't speak Punjabi, and this is Guru Gobind Singh Ji's language and you should learn it.
Oh my gosh, but the number of Punjabi people in the diaspora that don't speak a word of Punjabi is
staggering. But it's like, but then at the same time, like, okay, that's fair enough, right? I mean, I would want to learn. You want to go to the Gurdwara and you want to go to Punjabi school, but like they're not accommodating You know, they're not accepting. They're pushing you out every time you try to come in.
This is a community too that has really, you know, like you said, fetishized whiteness. The same celebrities that are now saying Black Lives Matter are the ones that are pushing skin lightening products back in India, right?
Yeah.
We change our names to have more Western sounding names. You know, the first thing, you know, cutting our hair, changing our name, having an English nickname, lightening our skin,
Yeah.
you know, and saying in the name of assimilation to make our lives easier here,
Yeah.
it has really more to do with, you know, even probably before India being under British rule for hundreds of years, but that really being ingrained in all those generations that white is superior.
Yeah.
And
You know,
we want our kids to be light skinned. We want life to be easier for them if they have green eyes or if they're light skinned, and it's in all of our music songs and everything of like,
Yeah.
you know, Gora Gora Rang and stuff like that. I was told that if I drank milk before I went to bed that my kid would be light skinned. And if you've seen her little girl,
Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
it doesn't make any sense.
Like when I was at the airport, right? Like everyone would look at my name tag and it says Jesse on my name tag. And
Yeah.
a lot of Punjabans would come up to me and be like, what is that short for? Are you just Karan? Are you just Vinder? Just Deep or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, my Punjabi name is Theg. And they're like, Theg? Theg Singh, huh?
But it never goes the other way.
It never goes the other way, right? Like, ask yourself, why is that? I
Could
want to
you
know.
imagine?
Could
you imagine?
I can't. I can't imagine this. I've thought of this before. Could you imagine, like, you're in India or you bring your white friend with you to India and they're introducing themselves. So my name is Gregory, but you can call me Guggen. You know, it's like, my name's Patricia, but just call me Deepa. It's easier, right? Like it never goes the other way.
It doesn't. But it should.
Right? And so it's like, over here, if you think about, do you not see what's going
Yeah.
on of like this sort of unspoken sort of, you know, white supremacy kind of attitude going on of like, your culture is inferior and you should be more like us.
Oh, if you, like, girls, you know, if they marry a white guy, you know, you leveled up. But,
Yeah.
you know, what we went through, you know, and, you know, like the people that really showed up for our Nandgarj were the ones that, and that was a beautiful day. I mean, we had all races, all religions represented there, and, you know, that to us was, you know, a real union for us. But, you know, we wouldn't have wanted it any other way. But that's not to say that it wasn't hard to have each of our families not show up for that, you know.
And like, it's kind of an interesting parallel when you think about the Sikh community and their relationship with being the voice of reason and like the champions of human rights and equal rights, historically speaking.
We should be modeling this right now.
I think all the building blocks are there.
I mean, this was all, the Atlantic slave trade was happening at the same time that Sikhi was changing the map of India on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
You know, and what our gurus were trying to destroy as far as social constructs in India was what was being hardened in North America.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in the same chunk of 400 years,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, whether it was like the aspiration for gender inequality or the caste system or anything, it was the oneness that our gurus were wanting to have for everybody. And then, you know, we are over here now, and
In America, there's slavery, there's genocide, there's
yeah,
ongoing wars between, you know, the Americans and the Native Americans, you know, between America and Mexico, American Revolution, you know, it's just like ongoing war, genocide, hatred, us versus them, nonstop. Yeah.
But there's absolutely no place for any kind of racism and prejudice in the Sikh diaspora.
Yeah.
With all the struggles that we have here as Sikhs in Canada, of, you know, wanting to fly with our kirpan or not taking off our kara for a medical exam, or, you know, wearing our kakars, those are choices when we observe and we keep our Sikhi. But this isn't, you know, the Kamagata Maru, yeah, it was 150 years ago, but we're talking about like yes, we immigrated here, but for Black Americans to have been brought here, and you know, the slave trade and everything else that happened, we as a Sikh community are way behind in championing social reform here.
Yeah, and like, I think it's kind of an interesting point. Like when you think about what the month is really capable of in
Yeah.
terms of being a voice for minority groups and for people to have equality or equal rights. You know, one thing that like at least Black people in America don't have is strong cultural roots where you can look back
Right.
and be like, oh yeah, we're from, you know, Trinidad or Jamaica or, you know,
Yeah.
Sudan or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? Like when I came to Canada, that's everybody was like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from the U.S. No, but where are you from? California. No, but where are you from?
No, but we're like, where are your parents
Oklahoma?
Before
Right?
that, your grandparents.
Right. And it's like there's no concept in Canada like for that's like off the get-go. There's
Well,
no
that's
concept of like slavery and oppression
Yeah.
for generations and generations.
Well, because you
and-
have Black people here that, like you said, they're from the islands, they're from Haiti, they're from Africa, they're from whatever. And even going back to our community, the first thing people ask you is "Kehdi jagah to hai?" Like they want to know
yeah.
what part in Punjab,
Yeah.
India, something,
Yeah.
right? And to see where you fit in with them. They're
Yeah.
immediately, it's a weird question, but I get it, of
Yeah.
trying to relate to you.
Yeah.
And then the minute that they know that you don't have that,
Yeah.
you're out. They've
Right.
asked you, where are you from? Because you have darker skin. Oh, you must be from this place, you must be from this place. And you're like, no, America. They go through 2-3 generations. No, before that, where are your parents from? Where are your grandparents from? Way back when, like, where are you from? And then you're
Yeah.
like, Africa. And then
They
you're
don't
out
understand.
right away.
Well, even that, it's
Yeah.
like I can't even say,
Yeah.
right? Like
That
I
you
know
don't know.
what my family history is up to a point, and
Yeah.
then there's just nothing in the record, right? But it's like I think Black people in general in America,
Yeah.
it's like your history is slavery,
Yes.
right? You cannot separate the Black identity from a history of oppression and struggle for self-determination or for equality and human rights, right? And so it's like you don't have indigenous language, you don't have indigenous religion, you don't have elders that you can look to in your community, you know, like from way back when, there's no comparable figure.
And that
to
didn't happen
Guru
by
Nanak Dev Ji,
accident. That didn't
right?
happen by accident, right?
Yeah, like
when
it's
the slave trade.
orchestrated through the slave trade, right?
Yeah.
Of separating people so they can't organize, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you look at like the Turner Revolution, right, in the 1800s,
Yeah.
right, where there is a slave who feels like he's been anointed, and he's like, I'm going to lead you to a revolt, right, and he leads a rebellion, the Turner Rebellion. Yeah, he leads a rebellion, kills like a few dozen, you know, white people and like slave owners, and like starts freeing all these slavery until he's eventually overrun, right? And then, but that like again that like totally set the community back,
Right.
But it's like there's no one who really comes close to giving you that the high standards of like morality or you know the enlightenment or spiritual attainment or like political striving like the way the gurus did.
Well, because
you know,
everything was,
yeah.
like you said, taken away too. You know, all of a sudden after emancipation, everyone was a Christian.
Yeah,
You know, it's just, they didn't have anything from all those generations before them.
yeah, and so it's like I think it's awesome that Sikh like Punjabis today
Yeah.
in the diaspora still have that strong connection to their past in a way that like we don't,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I feel like we got to make the most of that because we don't have that, and it's like, you know, it's like we got to continue that fight for recognition. You're talking about all the things that Punjabis fought really hard for to
Yeah.
keep like their identity, to
Our
keep their
names.
kakars, to keep the names.
You know, that
yeah.
happened with, you know, I was talking to our neighbor coming from Scotland, you know, her great-grandparents and everything coming from Scotland and how they had to change their names, you know, and our friend Molly, you know, like having an Italian name coming to New York and, you know, changing it because Italians weren't welcome, you know, and it's like here, I mean, by and large, I mean, like our family's name was changed or whatever because it was easier for the British to pronounce it and write it a certain way. But we've still kept Singh and Kaur. you know, and we've still kept our Sikh identity here, and we've, you know, we are so proud of having politicians or, you know, representatives of the Sikh community in a position to write policy or to implement change and to be our voice. But they're like, that is not the same as having 400 years of systemic, like the contract is that you don't have a voice, never mind having, like, that's why people were so happy when Barack Obama became president. Like, finally, here's somebody who's going to speak for us and be our mouthpiece. And it's not that easy. It's not one person is going to become president and in a 4-year term is going to undo 400 years of being muzzled and of being lynched and of being, you know, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are really disappointed in President Obama, but I mean, the weight that was put upon him to undo all of that is not realistic.
Yeah. But, you know, it's tough, right? It's hard to be the first of anything, I think, in general, too, but, you know, like, I think as we're sort of talking more about present day, like, it kind of makes you question where are we at today?
Yeah.
In the U.S., you know, there's the protests and then the rioting and the looting, and, you know, here in Canada as well,
it's been more peaceful here.
More peaceful.
It's been quieter and stuff like that, but we don't have the anger behind. So, you know, there's people that are saying like, okay, I get Black Lives Matter, but what does stealing a flat screen from Target have to do with that?
Yeah.
You know, and it's not about the property. It's not about that.
Yeah. And it's a fine line to walk, right? In terms of really empathizing with people who are frustrated and angry and have been through this so many times, and they're being shoved aside and ignored, right? And on one hand, it's like, I don't want there to be looting. I don't want there to be any of this, right? And like, but like, ask yourself, what does it take for a person to get to that point?
Yeah.
Right? Whether or not you think it's okay. What would it take for you to get to that point where you're so angry and frustrated that the system is moving so slowly?
Yeah.
Right? And people are dying every single day, and oppression is not a new thing.
No.
Right? It's not a new thing. And when you get to that point of like, enough is enough, what would it take for you to get there?
Well, and there's people that have noted that, you know, really President Trump didn't pay attention until the destruction of private businesses and corporations and everything really started to happen. And, you know, the community is angry that social contract has just been ripped apart. The contract said, if you are a law-abiding, good, peaceful person, if you dress this way, like no wife beaters, no saggy pants, no do-rags, none of this, you don't talk a certain way, you don't have your hands in your pockets, you don't drive with a broken taillight, like all of these things, that the police will be there to protect you and to whatever. And, you know, somebody calls 911, they'll mediate, they will serve and protect. But the contract is now that it doesn't matter if I'm all of these things, that agency is there to harm me.
Yeah, and I think generational trauma
Yep.
is something that doesn't really get talked about either.
And that's what the Indigenous community has been fighting against too,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right? And it's just like, what does it do to someone when, you know, there's, you know, the rate of incarceration is just through the roof, or substance abuse or crime levels, or like the dehumanization, and, you know, it's like there's no confidence in the law enforcement anymore because they feel like it's biased and it's not fair. Right? Which I don't think that's the case 100% of the time. But like it's happening regularly enough that like it's not a coincidence that people on both sides of the border, like in America it's with Black people, and in Canada it's Indigenous, right? It sort of flips, the statistic kind of flips, right? Where it's more Indigenous incarcerated in Canada.
Well,
right,
also, like, I mean, in Toronto, you know, it's the most, you know, it's been called the most diverse city in the world.
Yeah.
But, you know, the Toronto Police Service is still, and, you know, Ryerson University and whatever, now starting to card the profiling and everything else that people of color, broadly people of color, experience here, but we don't have that diversity in the States, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but there's no racism in Canada, by the way.
There isn't. I heard that. I heard that if we just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, right, we can make it.
Yeah, no, it doesn't exist. It's a problem in the
doesn't.
States, but it's not in Canada. There's no
It's not
racism
here.
here,
No.
apparently.
No.
Yeah, but it's like I think about this sort of idea of like, you know, like the unfair treatment for like certain skin colors or whatever, and you know, it's something that's sort of always in my mind because this is the story of generations of people before me, of like, you know, my grandparents being in the civil rights movement, or my great grandfather, you know, fighting in, you know, World War II, or, you know, my mother being, you know, assaulted horribly, you know, by white people throughout her entire life and trying desperately to fit in, and it was never enough. Right? Even being made fun of, right? Because she was trying to fit in so much, right? And then it's just like the lessons that they teach me as a kid now is like anti-whiteness, right? Is like what I have to come away with, and don't trust the police because, you know, this is what they've done to us as a people, and this is what they did to people in your family or whatever it is, right? And so, and like, for me now being a turban Sikh, going anywhere, like, you're gonna face discrimination. Like, I've been asked to take off my kirpan, and, you know, like, I'm not immune just because I'm not Punjabi, you know, and I'm very articulate in speaking English and whatever. Like, I'm not immune from a lot of the discrimination that a lot of Punjabis face, and especially, like, if they're observant of their kakars, right? And, like, I've been profiled before and whatever it is, and I'm like, there's a part of me that is happy to do that for the month, right? Of like, this is a choice that I made, right? And taking on that discrimination is a part of that choice,
Right.
Because it highlights a relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed, right? Or the person who's discriminating against someone who's otherwise an outstanding human being, right? And I think about that a lot in terms of like, yeah, like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with someone looking at me and sort of othering me or treating me poorly, thinking like, you know, who is this person with turban and beard and they gotta be a terrorist or whatever it is.
Right.
And like, okay, this is me suddenly putting on my clothing of, I'm on the front line now of, let me show them we're not all bad, we're great people, we're kind, we're compassionate, put our best foot forward. And then it sort of becomes like obvious in the public size, like, this is what this person's all about. You're ridiculous. Stop being a hater, right? But like, when it comes to being black, like, I have no illusions that if I was ever in a situation where somebody called the police on me, and I've had the police called on me before as a kid, you know, by neighbors and
and
yeah,
recently.
yeah, and like I've had people call the police on me as a kid, and I know now, like, as an adult and looking the way that I do, I don't think at all that I'm immune. Like, nobody's gonna care what kind of person I am.
As soon as that phone call comes in.
As soon as that phone call comes in, right? Like, I could just as easily be George Floyd.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna care. No officer is gonna care who's like out, who has that sort of mindset, right?
Yeah.
And like, I would totally expect that, you know, I would be, in hindsight, demonized. People saying, yeah, you deserve this. Right? Oh, he was unhinged and PTSD, this, that, or the other, and, you know, we'll look at his relationships falling apart, or like, you know, he's not the upstanding citizen you thought he was, blah, blah, blah. Like, I would expect that, right? And like, this is how my worldview has been affected by generational trauma.
Yeah.
Right? Of like, I spent enough time being seen as subhuman that now it's like, this is what I expect. Now I expect the world to treat me like this, like in certain ways, you know. And like, now I'm always ultra cautious around police, and, you know, am I giving anyone even the slightest inclination of like, am I being threatening or a public menace or whatever it is, where it's like to the nth degree, you know.
So we gotta wrap up this super long video. What do we do now? I want to say, like, what do we do now, and like, a call to action. Like, my first thing to say is that we, specifically the Punjabi Sikh community, has to stop using the N-word. I can't emphasize that enough. the comfort level and the ease that people have used it around us, and then they have that look where they realize they've just said it to you
or around me,
or around you,
yeah,
but the first thing they do is laugh, and they're like, yeah, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, and just try to relate to you. Like, just because we're brown and have our own struggles, that is not our word. And so that's like the first thing right away, whether you acknowledge anything else that we've talked about in this video, is that that word in any circumstance is never okay.
yeah. And like, you watching this video might not be okay with that. You might not be okay with this idea that this word is off limits to you.
That's okay.
That's okay. You're allowed to feel ambivalent, right? Notwithstanding, don't say it. Okay. But like with that, like, I think it's important that we make space for conversation.
It has to, yeah.
Right? There's never a good time to sit and ask people of, like, you know, try to put a pulse on what's going on in the streets, and you tell me, what's your take on this as a person of color? Or how have you been affected by this? Right? There's never a good time to just sit down and pull someone out of the blue and say, you know, how do you feel?
But
right?
now this has put it in everybody's front and center.
Yeah.
This is like, if maybe it was awkward, and I know for us, it gets tiring sometimes to be the token interracial couple in our community, of people asking me what it's like to be married to a black guy, and I'm like, guess what? He's a human being.
Yeah.
Like, it's not any, like, I don't know what they want me to tell them, right? And then for us, like, asking us questions and everything, and like, it can get tiring, I think, to be someone's research. But that said, now is the time that maybe you didn't know how to ask somebody something, but now's the time to do it, right? Like, this is what's in the news
There's
every day. This is happening,
right?
and you know, we'll do it. And you can't, all lives matter.
Yeah, that's another thing to stop saying. All lives matter.
Stop saying it. And blue lives matter, and all lives matter, and Sikh lives matter. This has happened in the same time frame that we remembered 1984 and Operation Blue Star. They can't even, again, this whole video is like our personal opinion, my personal opinion in this too, is that, like, I don't even want it to be in the same tweet or the same post of, you know, we stand in solidarity with our black brothers and sisters, you know, hashtag Black Lives Matter, while we remember what happened in Harmandir Sahib in 1984, hashtag Sikh Lives Matter. Like, they're not the same struggle, and they can't occupy the same space, because we're appropriating the fight now.
Yeah.
Like, every year we talk about 1984. We have Sikh Heritage Month, we have Black Heritage Month, we have Black History Month. We have these opportunities to reflect, but right now, like, the day of George Floyd's funeral was not the day to be sharing social media with Sikh Lives Matter and all that stuff. I mean, by all means, like, I'm not saying that it's not important, but
well,
it can't.
I do want to say that, like, there's a part of me that honestly feels bad that it's like, during this time of remembrance for 1984, it's not getting the attention that I feel like it should have, and especially amongst young people, young Punjabis.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, we spend so much time in the Gurdwara, you know, talking about 1699, right? Or like, and before that. But we spend no time whatsoever talking about the Anglo-Sikh Wars, or talking about partition, or talking about 1984. And I feel like these things are so incredibly relevant. They've totally reshaped the Sikh identity today, right? These more modern things. And like, I feel bad that, you know, I feel it's kind of a lost opportunity for a lot of people.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think that your point is really important, of like, don't try to piggyback off of somebody else's attention. Yeah. Right, with like a totally separate issue, and you're just like shoving yours in there to try to gain more traction. Like, just let's make space for both. While we're making space for discussion, let's make space for both. Let's not just, you know, black people are the only thing you're going to talk about or post about online, right? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Right.
We have this at the same time of like earlier when we were talking about, you know, fetishizing what whiteness is, like the young culture now, like the Nonjavan and everything, have romanticized rap and hip hop and basketball and, you know, gang culture and things like that, and then turn around and say Black Lives Matter is upsetting, right? And it's people that are, I mean, you don't want that, right? Like,
Well,
it's not.
I would say this is, on the one hand, I think that anything that you can do to try to maintain momentum with this issue, do it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to a rally, if it's taking pictures and posting it online with you and your sign, if it's,
Keep it.
you know, retweeting things or sharing things on your Instagram feed or whatever it is, do it. Right? There's no job that's too small
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. So it's like more power to you. Now, regardless of what you're doing online or in your community to try to, you know, be a responsible activist to whatever your capacity is,
Mm-hmm.
be honest with yourself, is what I would say. Don't be that person that goes to the rally, you hold up your sign, you have your
Take
5-second photo op, and then you
selfies,
go
yeah.
home and you're throwing around the N-word like it's free candy, and, you know, like you're shaming people in your community because of, you know, oh, so-and-so is going to marry someone who's not Punjabi, or,
Right.
you know, making fun of people for having dark colored skin, right, or whatever it is. Like, don't be that person. Be honest with yourself about where you're really at, you know, and work on it, you know. So it's like, again, having that discussion and like taking this time to just evaluate where you're at personally is a big part of that too, you know.
I think look into actiondignity.org. They're doing a lot of really great work with current events, with supporting the Cargill workers through COVID-19, and they're working and enhancing the voices of ethnocultural communities in Calgary.
Yeah.
Specifically, look them up. They're doing really amazing things. There's a lot of businesses that are supporting this too. Monogram Coffee has been very vocal in this, and it's not just like Blackout Tuesday and stuff. There is a way to, use your platform, whatever that is. If you're a YouTuber, if you're a social media, whatever, if you have a small business, if you have anything like that, to make your voice heard. And it's, I know even now is an unpopular opinion to support Black Lives Matter.
Right.
It may seem like an enormous movement and that everybody's in it, but everybody is not behind it, or we'd have some real change.
Right.
And so, there's a lot of businesses that want to keep quiet about it. And so, I've been really happy to see, Monogram Coffee is one that's really standing out, of like donating, their most popular coffee sales, like things like that they can tangibly do, where you could say like, I own a coffee shop, what am I supposed to do about this? That's a lot of stuff people can do. As always, like, our DMs are always open if people have questions or comments or feedback for us or want to talk to us.
But still, take the time to educate yourself and start reading up on some of the backstory with what's going on in the history, here, because it's important to know, right? It's very important.
And what not to do would be to not care, to not think that this doesn't affect you because you're not Black.
Or because it's not in your community.
It's not in your community, or because you haven't done this. If if you're that person that's saying, I'm not racist, I have lots of Black friends, or I'm not racist, I know this many people, or whatever, that's not good enough.
Right.
It's not enough. People have been saying this for weeks. It's not enough to just not be racist.
Yeah.
This is the time to be an ally and to be actively anti-racist.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, like, it reminds me of, like, it's not on people of color to fix this.
No.
Right? Because that's not where the problem is.
Yeah.
Right? This is how we're being treated by the rest of the world. Right? And so it's like, it's on white people to start caring more about this, so that you can change it, so that we're not constantly teaching our kids to discriminate.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's just like, every time you see it, you got to call it out, or this situation, the system's going to keep perpetuating itself. There's nothing I can do personally.
Yeah.
No matter what, like, no matter how much I go to school, no matter how much money I make, no matter what part of the country I live in, there's no escaping this for me.
No.
Right? It's not on me to bootstrap, right? To try to fix this myself. I just take care of myself and I'm good.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't exist.
I wanted to have you talk about this when you were talking about your time in Iraq. So there's a lot of, I mean, it hasn't happened here, but the National Guard and the military mobilizing in the States it's hard to see. It's hard to see that it's not just local law enforcement now. And that said, like, that local law enforcement has the history with community policing there. They know the neighborhood, they know the issues to that city, they know the issues at hand with whatever is going on, and then to bring in the National Guard or to mobilize like that. There are a lot of people, like, it really angers me to see people just throw it out there in a tweet of, I mean, then just stand down, just abstain, just, you know, Muhammad Ali did it and so did it, like, be a conscientious objector and just don't follow orders. And it is not that easy.
Yeah.
And I think I want you to talk about that as a soldier and what it means to be, you know, a 19-year-old kid doing your one weekend a month, and then you get mobilized and this is what you're facing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, like, I used to have this argument with angry civilians coming at me, like, when I was, you know, coming on leave from my deployments, getting ready for my deployment, and you'd see me in uniform out in the civilian world, and where people are like, they're totally apathetic about whatever it is that you're going through, right? Of like, you come back from the war and you're totally changed, and people are like, well, that's what you signed up for, you should have known better, you know, you brought this on yourself, basically, right? And I feel like with soldiers in a National Guard or even police officers right now who are conflicted about this because they don't want it to be this way either.
Yeah.
Right? Not just like, oh, I wish there wasn't looting because, you know, they don't feel like that's productive, right? It's not just that. It's like, I think a lot of police officers don't want there to be this level of racism, animosity towards law enforcement, or, you know, civil unrest, you know, period. Right? And so it's like, at the same time, it's like, you got to really think about this argument of just like blaming that soldier of like, you should have known what, you know, defending this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, means.
I mean, you have a very different understanding of...
Yeah. I have a very different understanding of what a domestic enemy is, right? You're thinking like terrorism at home and, you know, people like attacking innocent civilians and, you know, like some sort of outside agent, or people who are indoctrinating people within the country to like radicalize them towards extreme violence or something like that. Right? That's sort of like the image that comes to mind, right? But like, really, you're not... I know, like, when I joined the Army at 18 years old, I was not that forward-thinking or clear-headed, right? When I'm doing
and that
this.
all goes back to the system now. Like, where was the recruiting center in San Bernardino, right?
Yeah.
It's in the ghetto for a reason. That's your ticket out of there.
Yeah.
And so if you grab that ticket and you're like, I'm out of here, you know, I'm not going to go through what mom went through, and I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to have my college education paid for. I'm going to do all these things and serve my country.
Yeah.
To leave and then have this moral dilemma, and then people say, well, then just quit, just stand down.
It doesn't make sense.
You're asking that person to throw away so much more than a job.
Yeah, so much more than a job. Right? You're throwing away your identity, you're throwing away, you know, like friendships that are like, you know, like, this is hard for me to really explain to civilians what it's like, the way that soldiers love each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like, even me, out of the military 10 years now, meet other veterans, and there's a brotherhood there.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't have to say anything. We just know what it's like, right? We have this connection that civilians don't understand.
No.
Right? And when you're in that environment, like, just imagine that you meet someone who is, they are your parents, they are your kids, they are your closest family and friends, like, they are all the people in the world that matter to you in one person. Right? And you have this radical shift in your worldview of just like being willing to die for someone, or to suffer through something with someone, or to suffer more so that somebody else can suffer less. And it changes your psychology in this way where it's like a part of the bulk of your self-identity is the group identity.
Yeah.
And your individual identity matters way less.
Yeah.
Right? And like, trying to undo that in someone, of like, pull them out of that environment where there's this immense team cohesion like you wouldn't believe, right? And get them to to turn on the people that they love or to back out of that, right, is like, it's unrealistic, completely unrealistic.
It's unrealistic to also think that this person has a career in the military, or at least their years that they've signed up for. You're asking them to face federal prison, to be articled, to be, all these other things. The system is not equipped to take on however many thousands of soldiers that might be. And, now they've thrown away their housing security, their food security, their job security, everything else. Like, what are you going to take care of them? Like, there's people that are saying... That's
what I was going to say, is like, if you're asking someone to do this, where's the support for that person? Right.
And the system's never been set for it.
They have families to take care of too. They have their own, physical needs and security needs, and like, let's look at the next step.
Yeah.
Don't just ask them to step down.
Yeah.
Think about, like, where's this person going to get food? What's this person going to go through?
Yeah.
Right. You lose your rank, you lose your pay, you face jail time, dishonorable discharge, or whatever it is. Your brothers and sisters in arms are now gone.
Yeah.
You're totally thrown into this other world that, just won't accept you for other reasons now as well, right? And then there's, how do you feed yourself? Where are you gonna, what's, etc. So it's like, it's a hard situation, right? Like, you got to think about the consequences of what that really means, right? So instead of asking people willy-nilly, right, to just do it, take a second to actually really think about what that looks like and what that person is going to go through, and then empathize, right? Like, we're people first.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know, we saw some tweet a couple days ago where they were talking about military trying to convince people to obey curfew, like, by being nice to them.
Oh, yeah, they were saying, like, oh, where have I seen this before? First we're going to be nice to civilians and everything, and this is propaganda, this is all a psyop, this is whatever, because look what we did in Iraq. We were teaching Iraqi civilians to do the Macarena.
Yeah.
And then killing them. And that's not what happened after you.
And it's like, you put on the uniform, doesn't matter if you're a police officer or a soldier or whatever, you put on that uniform, every single thing you do is not somehow the aims and intention of the state or the institution. You're a person first.
Yeah.
And like, I went to war, and we played games with the kids and gave out candy and school supplies and stuff when we could, and just talking to people about what's your life like, and trying to learn Arabic, and just getting to know people as people, being kind, because that's who we were, right? Like, we had a mission to do, but like, at the end of the day, like, that's still another human being, and you're going to treat them like a human being every chance you get, right? And so it's like, no, you're not, like, this, it's not some kind of subversive ulterior motive that's happening when it's like, oh, this police officer is being nice to me, or they're apologizing, or whatever it is. Like, I'm sure, like, they're just as conflicted with what's going on too. Like, we got to really cut them some slack. It's not that simple of like, you're the enemy because you are some part of this tentacle of the state that's trying to oppress the masses and silence black voices, or whatever it is, right? It's just like, like, we gotta give them more credit. And like, to that point too, of like, if you're asking people to step down or whatever, and like getting resources, like, more along that point, it's like, for police departments too, like, we know that there's a lack of training, and that's a huge problem, right? We got to do that stuff. The world is much better off with police in it, right? It's, as much as we're saying what happened was wrong, the lack of punitive action is wrong, the lack of accountability is wrong, like, we got to try to find other ways to support these organizations so that, like, they can like, I know it's a super slow process, but we got to try to evolve these organizations.
Yeah.
Right? Like, these police officers, they need more time and attention for their mental health, right? Like, they need more time off. There need to be more police officers. There need to be people who are there to help build public relations, positive relationships between police departments and the communities that they serve, and and so on and so forth. So there's a ton of infrastructure that has to go into this too.
Yeah. And
we got to think about, how are we going to build that up, because everybody's going to benefit from that, right?
Cool.
So, anything else?
What else can people do? I guess that's it. It's just start having conversations. Start
Yeah.
talking, start, you know,
Empathize.
yeah, maybe going to a protest isn't for you. But
That's okay.
that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think like that's such a huge movement to get behind, like a protest or, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. But you have to start with your group of people. And if you really did an inventory of, you know, the racial jokes that you have in your group of friends or at home, or questioning your deep-rooted beliefs about people of color or the us and them, or, you know, like, is that me? Do I really believe these things? Because you know, that changes who you are, and in a moment will change how you treat somebody face to face or in an, you know, in a tense situation. These police officers, like Derek Chauvin, had his beliefs, had his prejudice, had his deep-seated racism, and when it needed to happen, like when he was face to face with George Floyd, made a choice that killed him. You know, and it's hard to see. I think where I want to end things, if we want to wrap up, is that, you know, we have a little girl who, you know, asked us a week ago if people were going to hurt her because she's Black. Not knowing about George Floyd or any of this, but in talking to her about who she is, that's the first thing that came to mind. So you have an opportunity with your kids and with kids that are around you or in your group of friends or family to have discussions and not teach hatred and racism. Because that didn't just happen with these officers that, you know, it starts that way and then it becomes ingrained in them, and then these people become officers and teachers and doctors and nurses and policy writers and, you know, everything else. And then it perpetuates it because they have these beliefs and they're in a position to be in power or care or, you know, decision making, and treat that person in a certain way. You know, and it has to stop. And so in one way, yeah, we're looking to change legislation and change, you know, whole movements and huge organizations, but you know, our kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that we deal with here in Calgary, like, you know, with the things that kids say to us.
Right. Well, you know, it's I was talking to somebody recently, and I was saying that I've had a few moments now just in my adult life of clarity.
Yeah.
Where it's things have really come full circle for me, and I feel like I'm a very different person than who I was. Whether it's like mental health and the journey that I've been on there, whether it's me as a veteran in that journey, whether it's me as a father, or it's me as, you know, a person of color, or me as a role model and, you know, community figure. There was never passing of the torch.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Right? Like, by some miracle, I had this realization that, like, I have to be the one to step up and try to make a difference. Right? And I don't know if I can. I certainly can't do it alone, but I have to try. Right? And raise my voice, or I raise my words in such a way where it's like inspiring other people to say, hey, like, we have to think about the future. We can't just think about ourselves, or we can't just think about the day-to-day concerns about, you know, personal gratification or, you know, job security or food security or whatever it is, right? Everyone struggles a little bit different, but it's like at some point, like, we really got to start thinking about the next generation and making the world worthy for them to inherit. Yeah. Love you.
Me too. Thanks.
I think it's a wrap.
Thanks for an hour.
Yeah.
If you're still
15.
watching.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
If
you
you're
for
still watching.
bearing with us. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or you can even comment on this video below. Reach out to me somehow if you want to keep the conversation going, or like, as much as we talked about for an hour and a bit, this is still just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much more to say about absolutely everything, and the rabbit hole just keeps on going. Right? This is not by any means a comprehensive list of what's going on in the world today, and why it matters or anything like that. So like, let's keep talking and keep trying to build bridges, you know, and keep the conversation going. But we definitely appreciate you guys who have taken this time to really think about it and who have been doing as much as you have to raise these types of issues and push for more equality and fair treatment, you know, in light of all the recent events that have been going on. It's the U.S. is just going off like a powder cake right now.
Yeah. And it was time.
Yeah.
It was time.
It's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, I never would have expected this.
Yeah.
You know, if you asked me this at any point before it happened, right? Of this, yeah, insanity. But
Yeah, so thank you for watching, and to everybody who has supported us through all of these years and
encouraged us or
Yeah.
shown up
shown up.
emotionally or physically.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
held space for us in the last couple of weeks while we tried to sort out how we feel and what we think about everything going on.
Having those difficult conversations and
Yeah.
listening.
And for people who have
Yeah.
been an amazing role model for our little girl. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's a wrap.